The last several sermons about transition. As you may remember, there are 5 elements to transitions as it's laid out in the book Transitions by William Bridges. The 5 elements of transition are disengagement, dismantling, disidentification, disenchantment, and disorientation. If you'll remember, like if we take the example of, let's say, a divorce, that is an example of a transition where there is a clear ending. There may be there's a neutral zone in the middle, and then there's a new beginning. With let's just take divorce for an example. If you talk about disengagement, that could be the ending of the marriage, the time when someone leaves or a divorce is being filed for. That is the disengagement where two people separate. In that separation is a dismantling of the marriage. Sometimes it's a marriage that's been that has lasted for quite some time. And so dismantling is an arduous process of changing bank accounts and moving houses and moving away from each other, dismantling the life that you've built together. Part of that then comes with disidentification. I am not the spouse anymore. I am not the protector, or I am not the provider anymore. So this disidentification as someone who used to be that most significant person is now, there's this disidentification of now I'm not that person anymore. Disenchantment comes when perhaps you found out that what you thought was true was not true at all. The way that things existed for you in your mind, you may discover through this disenchantment process that it wasn't really that way. And then disorientation comes when all of these things come together and you don't quite know what to make of it. This disorientation is a very difficult, confusing time. So all of these elements make up the process of transition. And so when people, celebrate the idea of beautiful transformation, it's like there's a deeper quality of transition that happens with any transformation that can be very scary, very confusing, very disorienting, and certainly not something to be enjoyed in the moment. We talked about the first sermon we preached on this topic. We talked about cleaning out the garage, identifying the areas that need to change, figuring out the things that we need to let go of and the things that need to change. The next service, we talked about endings and those, every transition that we experience starts with an ending. Something comes to an end, and that can feel traumatic, especially if that ending was not your choice. If we talk about the death of a loved one, if we talk about a divorce that you did not file for and that you did not want, it can feel very traumatic. We talked about the difference between change and transition. Change is situational. It's the walking out. It's the death of the loved one. That is the change. But the transition is an internal process. It's a shift in identity. It's a redefinition of who we are as an individual. And without this very important change in identity, this transition, this internal shift, the change won't actually, without the transition, without the internal process, the change won't actually take hold. You may switch jobs, but the same process that caused you to lose that job, in some cases, if the job loss was a result of a termination, then if we don't actually experience transition in that, if we just endure the change, then we won't actually take a new person into our next job. We'll have the same problems, we'll have the same things that are causing trouble will go into our next job and the next job after that. So this transition process is what creates change in us. And sometimes even positive. We talked about in endings, we talked about sometimes even positive transformation can rock the foundations of your identity. Even if it's a promotion, that promotion is a transition that takes a process of getting used to, because that promotion comes with a new identity, and it can be hard, it can be stressful. Sometimes inheriting a bunch of money or something that could be considered positive is a transition that requires care. The next time we got together, we talked about the neutral zone, this time of nothingness, the time where nothing feels certain, nothing makes sense. It feels like sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. It's just this period of nothingness where it feels like everything is just dragging on, and you're like, okay, so let's get on with it already. In the book, Transitions, William Bridges talks about this neutral zone that feels so empty. There was a woman, he gives an example of a woman who he was talking to, who said, I wish you would be able to like get through to my husband. He didn't want to come today, but to listen to your talk, but I sure wish that you could talk to him, because he sure needs to hear what you're talking about. And she said, I just wish he would get his life together. He's just causing all kinds of trouble in our marriage. And William Bridges said to her, he's not the one who's here. You're the one who's here. So it's you that needs to hear the message that I have today. Months later, he encounters this woman again. And this is what he wrote in the book. I ran into her 3 or 4 months later, and everything had fallen apart. Her husband had suddenly left one evening and was now living in a nearby city. During the following weeks, there had been some dreadful fights on the telephone, then some dreary negotiations about money and about the children, and finally the start of divorce proceedings. I can't pretend it's not all over now, Connie said sadly, but I'd do anything if it weren't. Topics of our discussions at that point were practical: how to talk about divorce to the kids, how to find work, how to deal with her parents, how to start a social life again. Whenever talk turned to the meaning of the separation, she'd say angrily, well, you'd have to talk to him because he was the one who did it. In time, however, this changed. She began to talk about what she had lost. She had lost a great deal of security, for one thing, because the family income all came from her husband's work. She had lost companionship, for although she had traveled a good deal, she had never felt alone in the world, as she put it. She had lost a sexual partner too, and a confidant, as well as a critic and an instructor. When I pressed her to explain these last losses further, she said sadly and softly, my self-esteem as a woman and as a person was all tied up with his reactions to me. I didn't just lose a husband. I lost a way of evaluating myself. He was my mirror. Now, I don't know how I look anymore. This neutral zone that we talked about last time is a time where you discover that the thing that ended had been a mirror. It had in some way reflected yourself back to you, so that you had a way to identify yourself. And when that is no longer there, it's very confusing. It's like someone broke the mirror, and now how do you identify it? What do you want? That neutral zone is a good opportunity to ask, what do you want? What don't you want? What is it that changed? What was it in that change that wasn't working? And what kind of new opportunities are available to you now that change has taken place? And it's an opportunity to get rid of the shoulds. Well, I should fill in the blank. But that's a good opportunity to let those shoulds go. We also talked about in one of those sermons, we talked about a lobster. If you remember, the lobster gives us a really good image of what it's like when we go through transition. It's like that the new shell of a lobster forms inside the old shell until it gets so big that the old shell is shed and the new shell uh, is becomes that lobster's protection. But that new shell is vulnerable until it hardens, and it's a good analogy for letting go of the things that you thought were critical to your survival. In the case of a lobster, that old shell was very much a part of that lobster's identity. And then when it is shed, it is like we are shedding things that used to be critical to our survival, our self-image, our beliefs, our perspectives, the assumptions that we made, the friendships that we had. All of these must be analyzed and evaluated in this transition. So now we talk about new beginnings. When do you know when the neutral zone is done and the new beginning is ready to start? Dr. Bridges talks about this new beginning coming to you when it is ready to take place. So in other words, when you are ready to emerge, the opportunity will present itself. One example that he gave was a book that is lying on a friend's coffee table that you've looked at many times before and just thought it was an interesting read, but not really relevant to where you are. And then one day you pick it up and it changes your life. It's like discovery of that opportunity, of that book was keyed, was coded for that moment when you picked it up that 13th time. And suddenly it makes a world of difference because of where you are in that moment. New beginnings are if you were to, if you were to find that situation and it doesn't change anything about you, then the neutral zone is not done with you yet. So just trusting that the new beginning will happen when you are ready. New beginnings are often thought of as positive experiences. For example, uplifting, exciting things, celebrations like landmark birthdays, or going off to college, or getting married, or having a baby. New beginnings are often seen as celebratory. And we talk about the spring where the leaves, where the trees bud new leaves and beautiful colors and flowers, come up from the frozen ground and delight us, and the weather turns warm and we're celebrating and we're getting out and we're doing yard work and we're having fun and we're breathing in the fresh air. All these positive feelings about new beginnings. But new beginnings can also be very, very hard. Landmark birthdays often mean increased responsibility or getting older and all of the aches and pains that come along with that. College is where you learn to be an adult and you're cutting the apron strings. Weddings bring with them a period of getting to know your new spouse and learning to blend your lives. And that is not always easy. That is not always celebratory. And then the baby or the adoption that you experience is adding another person to your household. And that brings with it a whole host of new challenges. So it's not always the and it can be very hard and as much as we celebrate them, we all have trouble with new beginnings because real change destroys old ways that we have learned to equate with who we are and what we need. It's also possible that other people will feel a twinge when you experience a transition, when you experience a new beginning. Sometimes people will take it personally. And I'm sure that you have experienced this in your life where perhaps you stop eating certain foods. You decide that you don't want to eat animal products, for instance, or you become you start eating gluten free, or you stop eating dairy, or whatever. You have this new eating new food plan, and people start taking it personally. What do you mean you don't want ribs? This is a barbecue. What are you going to eat? You just gonna eat carrots? um you stop eating sugar or flour, and suddenly you don't want granny's famous apple pie, and people take that personally. You start managing your money differently, and suddenly you're not available to offer a loan, or you're not available to send gas money home with the kids. You stop going certain places. What do you mean you can't be part of the bowling league anymore? What do you mean that's a problem? You start treating yourself differently. You start standing up for yourself, and suddenly you're just a troublemaker. Your new beginning is starting to make waves. Bridges says new beginnings often bring conflict and even a sense of betrayal. The person's imminent change sets off danger signals in the other, for it rightly suggests that the old tacit on which the relationship was based are headed for renegotiation. You be this way and I'll be that way doesn't work anymore, because now I want to be that way. And you, well, you'll have to do some changing too. A situation such as this must be dealt with openly and honestly, for indirection and denial only increase the other's resistance. This new beginning is creating waves, and it's time to have some hard conversations. This confuses and threatens their status quo. I remember when I came out as transgender. Some of you may remember a presentation that I did several years ago at Heartland UU, where I talked about my transition from female to male. And I come from a very strict religious, Baptist family. And my transition was extremely painful for my family. And one of the conversations that I had with my mother was, if you transition to male, then what are we going to call you? You're not going to be Brenda anymore. You're not going to be Auntie Brenda anymore to your nieces and nephews. Who are you going to be? What are we going to call you? And what does that make us? I don't have two sons. I have one son, my brother. I have one son. I don't have two sons. And so it's like it was affecting her identity. If you're a different you, then what does that make me? When I transitioned, I was single. I didn't have a partner at the time that I transitioned from female to male. But in many cases, a gender transition is complicated by the relationship that the person is in. Many trans men as lesbians before transition, and they may be in a relationship with a woman, a lesbian. And when they transition to male, it affects their partner's identity, because now their partner is seen as a straight woman. And if that partner has a significant part of their identity wrapped up in their lesbian community, then all of that is at stake if they stay together. And so new beginnings can result in shifts in identity for people around us, our loved ones, our family, and it can result in loss of community. So in some cases, new beginnings require cutting the cord. I remember this last week we were talking about the new beginnings, my partner Desiree and I. We were talking about new beginnings, and I was talking about this. I've never been parasailing, but I remember seeing like videos of people parasailing, and sometimes they come in for a smooth landing back onto the boat, and other times their parasail comes crashing down. If you're familiar with parasailing, it's like you've got the boat in the water and then this long cord, and then up in the air is this person hanging by a parachute and experiencing this beautiful flight through the air, propelled by the boat. And while they're up there, it's like that parachute is keeping them afloat. That parachute is the thing that's keeping them in the air. And then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it comes crashing down. Something goes wrong, and the person goes into the water. They start swimming, and then that long parachute is behind them, and it's just like this big balloon behind them, and that person's trying to swim, and then this parachute's huge balloon behind them, and that parachute that used to be the thing that sustained them is now the thing that is holding them back. And as much as that person tries to swim against the pull of that parachute, it's like all of their energy is spent just trying to stay afloat. It's like there's no forward momentum as long as that parachute is back there holding them back. So what they end up having to do is, I imagine the figurative thing. I don't see many people cutting the cord in an actual parasailing event like that. But in the figurative, we need to cut that cord. We need to let go of that parachute, that thing that used to be so vital to our momentum is no longer the thing that is going to see us into the future. One example would be quitting smoking. If you have had a smoking problem for a long time and you finally find the wherewithal to quit, then it's possible you may need to stop hanging around with people who smoke. That may just be a parachute that's holding you back. If you've lost weight, then you may need to stop hanging around with people who criticize your diet or people who continue to offer you comfort foods, because that's what we eat at this time of year. If you've gone through a gender transition, then people who continue to use your old names, your old name or your pronouns, old pronouns, you may need to move away for a season. If you have new career goals or ambitions, then you may need to leave that toxic work environment. Some things that we leave behind for good, like the cigarettes. Other things we leave behind for a season. It's not easy to say no to a loved one, especially when they love you deeply. In my case, when I transitioned from female to male, my family struggled with it so much that I needed to literally move away for a season. And we went through a number of years where we talked very little to each other because they were going through their healing process and I was going through my new beginning. And it was very challenging for us to spend time together because every time I would go back home, they would continue to be, they would represent this huge parachute that would keep me from my forward momentum. we're moving into the holiday season. We've just finished a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I enjoyed hearing the Thanksgiving stories before we started service today. We're getting ready to go into Christmas, New Year's, new resolutions, all of the celebratory times where we're seeing family. And I want to challenge you to consider what is holding you back, who is holding you back. And in this time of holiday cheer, I urge you to take care of yourself. If you have new beginnings that you're celebrating and you're looking forward to, and you're just getting your traction, you're just getting your new momentum, consider alternate holiday plans with people who will hold you back, who will serve as that parachute behind you. Cut the cord on the parachutes that are keeping you stuck in the past so you can live into the wonderful new future that is waiting for you. Thank you.